to the Asian Clean Energy Forum 2022, ADB's flagship energy event. I'm Steve Peters from the Energy Sector Group. The theme of this opening plenary is Catalyzing the Energy Transition.
Affordable and clean energy, inclusive growth, sustainable development, and climate action. How do we accomplish these together in Asia and the Pacific? In line with ADB's Strategy 2030 and its global commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 7 and SDG 13, nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement and COP26's net zero emissions by mid-century. We aim to fast-track Asia and the Pacific's transition to a low-carbon and resilient future. The forum will explore key innovations in policy, technology, cross-sectoral integration, and climate financing. Policies around energy efficiency are needed to build on gains made in climate mitigation and adaptation to reach our sustainable development goals. For example, in the East Asia region, we will see the benefits of efficient district heating and cooling and its decarbonizing effects. We will study the progress made through nascent clean energy projects in developing member countries, such as the deployment of renewable energy technologies in Azerbaijan, the Kyrgyz Republic, and Uzbekistan, or the push for green hydrogen and learning how to harness it more efficiently, or the use of carbon capture, utilization, and storage, or CCUS, technologies that are now more affordable. Solutions abound, but they need to be integrated across sectors, which the ADB 2021 energy policy emphasizes in supporting Asia and the Pacific's low-carbon transition. To accelerate growing economies by creating green jobs, while providing the remaining 157 million unserved individuals in the region access to electricity, and 1.67 billion people with access to clean cooking. Much attention is being devoted to cross-sectoral innovations that might enable the Pacific to supply the world with what it needs: oxygen, water, and food. Increased financing and innovative financing models in line with the Paris Agreement are pivotal to make these happen. As Asia and the Pacific's Climate Bank, we are aiming to invest $100 billion in cumulative climate finance from 2019 to 2030. We need to work together to accelerate Asia and the Pacific's clean energy transformation. But we must act now. Let us intentionally move together, ensure an inclusive clean energy transformation for Asia and the Pacific towards a resilient, sustainable future for all.
It is my pleasure to introduce the President of the Asian Development Bank and the Chairperson of the Board of Directors, President Masatsugu Asakawa, with his recorded welcome remarks.
Greetings. It is a pleasure to welcome some 3,000 participants at the 17th Asia Clean Energy Forum. I greatly appreciate the support of our co-organizers, the United States Agency for International Development and the Korea Energy Agency, and our distinguished keynote speakers. This year's theme, Innovative and Integrated Solutions for a Low-Carbon and Resilient Future, underscores the need to deliver tangible results on climate change and to promote a green recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. I am confident that your discussions will contribute to bold but achievable clean energy solutions for Asia and the Pacific. As you address the topics on the agenda, let me leave you with this call to action. We must strive to transition to clean, secure, resilient energy that can also support just and inclusive growth for the region. The uncomfortable truth is that energy is essential for the economic growth that has lifted millions out of poverty in Asia and the Pacific. But the hard reality is that the region now accounts for over 50% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And so, we need to boost the region's energy capacity while also ensuring that new and existing sources of energy are cleaner. And we must provide affordable energy to some 157 million people who remain without electricity. At the same time, we have to navigate the challenges from the pandemic and the volatility in energy markets and other setbacks due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The transition to a net zero future will not be stress-free. It calls for an overhaul of the energy sector, its policies, structure, governance, financing, and technologies. We have taken an important step with the approval of ADB's energy policy last November. Rest assured that ADB will continue to persevere and serve as a steadfast partner to deliver ambitious, effective solutions. This will build on our ambition to provide $100 billion in cumulative climate finance between 2019 and 2030. ADB's innovative financing models, such as our energy transition mechanism and the ASEAN Green Recovery Platform, and our new energy policy, which aligns with the Paris Agreement. We will also support your efforts to meet nationally determined contributions and the Sustainable Development Goals, and we will pursue other indispensable development priorities, such as gender equality and regional cooperation. I know that we can work together in these areas to accelerate a just energy transition so that we can achieve a more prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Asia and the Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you, President Massa. Managing Director General of the Asian Development Bank, Mr. Woo-Chong will now share his introductory remarks.
Thank you, Steve. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. So ladies and gentlemen, colleagues in the clean energy sector, welcome to the 17th Asia Clean Energy Forum, ACEF 2022. This event, ACEF, is especially close to my heart because I was part of the team which launched this knowledge forum back in 2006 with a modest number of participants involving around 100 people. But over the years, this event has grown and evolved into one of the flagship clean energy knowledge events in the world. And I know that this is something that everyone in the clean energy sector space eagerly looks forward to and marks the calendar. So I believe this event has grown to host around 1,600 participants during the non-pandemic period back in 2019 and over 3,400 people during the pandemic times via virtual format. I'm hoping that we can revert to the face-to-face format in the near future so that we can get the best of this incredible event. And of course, it's not just about the number of people, but also the content. And in that connection, I'd like to explore what sets the ACEF 22 apart from the 16 ACEFs preceding it. The short answer is the urgency. Today, we are faced with a growing urgency of paving pathways for a resilient and sustainable future. In this task, clean energy is at the center stage. Clean energy is the key to addressing climate change. It is central to our efforts to achieve net zero emissions by mid-century. Clean energy promotes inclusive growth as it helps provide access to more communities, even in remote areas, while lowering greenhouse gas emissions. Clean energy can also help increase agricultural productivity, which can ease the food supply problems. And what's more, rising oil prices and the uncertainty of petroleum supplies in the recent months underscored the importance of attaining energy security through clean energy development. So the theme of ACEF 22, innovative and integrated solutions for a low carbon and resilient future, is completely appropriate. And this week, we will explore innovative solutions in three critical areas: technology, finance, and policy, that are needed to make energy transition happen. In line with this, our discussions will be along the four thematic tracks. These are policy reforms for energy transition, innovative low-carbon technologies, cross-sectoral applications for inclusive energy transition, and financing actions to achieve the nationally determined contributions, the NDCs. The regional sessions will feature ADB's first-hand experience and lessons learned in implementing clean energy projects, and we will have spotlight sessions on new and innovative technologies and pertinent and timely issues on clean energy development. We will also do a deep dive sessions for more extensive discussions on various aspects of clean energy, such as business models, innovative technologies, financing, and regulations. At this opening session, our lineup of distinguished speakers include ADB's President Masa, who had just completed to deliver his welcome remarks. And later on, keynote speeches will be given by Dr. Hye-sung Lee, the chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And of course, he's a great friend of the ADB, and he's a champion for ADB's climate change actions. We also have Mr. Martin Keller, the director of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and president of the Alliance for Sustainable Energy, and Andrea Watson, program manager for strategy, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Afterwards, we will move on to the panel discussions, where we will focus on following questions. How much of the various climate change targets can be achieved by 2030 at the rate that NDC action is currently being delivered? What are the key challenges that countries in the Asia and the Pacific region need to overcome to accelerate their energy transition? What integrated solutions or appropriate support the energy transition are needed? Can the climate adaptation be incorporated into the transition? And we need to find a way to support developing countries in implementing these. And finally, how can the multilateral development banks, such as the ADB, close the financing gap to support energy transition and facilitate meeting the 1.5 degrees Celsius Paris target? So as we examine these questions, I'm sorry, there's a fire drill going on here. Steve, can you hear me okay? Steve, can you hear me? Okay, sorry about that. Looks like they're doing a great job in terms of a surprise fire drill in our building. So as we examine these questions, we are looking at various questions and issues that we are keeping an eye on. So first, we must make a decisive switch now from fossil fuels to renewable energy and energy efficient technologies. This requires boosting investments in energy efficient technologies that reduce energy demand, and in renewable energy systems and making the systems climate resilient. Grid and off-grid infrastructure must be modernized with the latest smart and digital technologies to better integrate renewable energy into power systems. Second, we must create the policy and market environment needed to execute this transition at the reasonable cost. Market structures, physical policies, and regulatory processes must be aligned to facilitate the deployment of the clean energy technologies that can deliver the greatest benefits to the largest number at the lowest cost. Third, we must mobilize finance and develop effective investment channels. This requires a smart use of public finance to further leverage private sector investments and other financing sources such as carbon market and philanthropies. The work needed to achieve the net zero carbon emissions by the mid-century is daunting, but urgency is what sets this year's conference apart. We must act now. We cannot delay. To succeed, in meeting the existential challenge, we need to assemble all the brains and brawns that we can and get people to collaborate and work closely together. Indeed, multi-sectoral and cross-sectoral cooperation is critical, and governments must work effectively with technical experts, technology innovators, international agencies, and the private sector. This is vital to mobilize more resources and advanced technologies to build new green power facilities. Collaboration can also speed up the shift to renewable energy and energy efficiency in other sectors of the economy, such as transportation, water, urban agriculture, education, health, among others. We also need to involve various sectors and strata in the society, particularly the disadvantaged groups such as women and rural communities. This will ensure that the benefits from the clean energy development are well distributed and no one must be left behind. And once again, I'm very, very happy to have you all here for the ACEF 2022. And I look forward to having a lively discussion in the sessions we have prepared for you. By sharing your knowledge, experiences, and insights, you will ensure that we will have a productive and meaningful week here at the year's forum. And thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, MDG Wu Chong. Dr. Sung-Hoon Lee, President of the Chief Executive Officer of the Korean Energy Agency, will now share his recorded introductory remarks.
Hello everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you. My name is Sang-Hoon Lee and I am the President of Korea Energy Agency. Welcome to the Asia Clean Energy Forum 2022. From today, we'll discuss on innovative and integrated solutions for low carbon and resilient future. I would like to take this opportunity to appreciate and thank the following distinguished supporters for arranging this special event: ADB President Masatsugu Asakawa, ADB Managing Director General and Officer in charge of Vice President Woo Jong-um, USAID Chief Climate Officer and Deputy Assistant Administrator Gillan Caldwell, and Chair of IPCC Hwae-sung Lee. Thank you all so much. Also, thank you to everyone here at this forum today. The transition to an industrial society based on fossil fuel has led to both economic growth and the climate crisis. And now humanity is preparing for another historic transition, the transition to a carbon neutral civilization. This transition to a carbon neutral civilization, even during COVID-19, is not a choice. It is the way we must go if we are to have a planet worth living in. Last November, the Paris Agreement Article 6 rulebook was completed at COP26 in Glasgow, England. Accordingly, each country submitted detailed plans and goals for carbon neutrality. Now, the international community's climate efforts are accelerating. A significant example is that South Korea has enhanced its NDC goal, which is to reduce carbon emissions by 40% below 2018 levels by 2030. Meanwhile, the government is establishing the implementing plan for this greater challenging goal. As an effort for carbon neutrality, in 2017, South Korea announced its Renewable Energy 3020 plan, which aimed at increasing the share of renewable energy up to 20% by 2030, with more than 95% of the new facilities in the form of clean energy such as solar and wind power. After announcing the 3020 plan, we have exceeded it for the fourth consecutive year and will also keep trying to reach the 2030 goals. As ASEAN countries strive forward the share of renewable energy in the total primary energy supply is reportedly processing. In 2019, ASEAN countries reached 14% and continue to rise towards 23% target for 2025. In the power sector, the share of renewable energy installed capacity has already reached 20.7%, not far from the 35% target for 2025, which shows that the next 2 to 3 years will be a meaningful period for ASEAN. If South Korea's experiences are shared and technological cooperation is added to ASEAN's efforts, both will likely benefit in the final goal of global carbon neutrality. This has the potential to be a significant event in carbon reduction cooperation. Just as changes have occurred in all sectors of our society after COVID-19, all of us here too should participate in the change towards carbon neutrality for this and future generations. Here is my commitment to you. Korea Energy Agency and I will push forward to respond to climate change, not only in South Korea, but also around the world through cooperation between institutions, countries, and international organizations. This ACEF 2022 will be held virtually due to COVID-19, just like it was last year. Although it is a short event for a week, there will be in-depth workshops and special events in various fields, especially in line with the main theme of innovative and integrated solutions for a low-carbon and resilient future. Korea Energy Agency will hold a deep dive workshop introducing sector coupling based on renewable energy. We would be grateful for your interest and support. Please participate actively in the event and share your opinions with experts to take advantage of the opportunity for a low carbon transition. Once again, I would like to welcome and thank all participants and event organizers. Surely, with your support, ACEF 2022 will be successful. I hope every country gets back to normal after recovering from COVID-19 as soon as possible and reach one step closer to carbon neutrality with a comprehensive climate change response. Best wishes for your health and your family's comfort. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sang-Hoon Lee. Gillian Caldwell, Chief Climate Officer and Deputy Assistant Administrator, U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, will share her recorded introductory remarks.
Greetings. I'm Gillian Caldwell, the Chief Climate Officer at the U.S. Agency for International Development. On behalf of USAID, I'm honored to join you for the opening of the 17th Annual Clean Energy Forum. First, I'd like to thank our co-sponsors and distinguished colleagues, Mr. Asakawa, President of the Asian Development Bank, Mr. Managing Director General of the Asian Development Bank, and Mr. Lee, President of the Korea Energy Agency. USAID is proud to continue our support of this important event as we come together to discuss opportunities, strategies, and best practices for a resilient, low-carbon future. The climate crisis is no longer a distant challenge for future generations. It has already begun. We can see this from the historic droughts, fires, storms, and flooding that are affecting every part of Asia and around the world. To reduce the most catastrophic outcomes of the climate crisis in this century, we need to secure ambitious and aggressive climate mitigation and adaptation outcomes. Just as the United States has seen wildfires in California 8 times larger than they were 50 years ago. Asia has witnessed storms and other extreme weather events that have increased in frequency and intensity each year. Climate change is growing ever more severe as South Asia's glaciers melt and the Pacific Islands battle existential rises in sea levels. On Earth Day, USAID was proud to release our new climate strategy, calling for a whole-of-agency response to this crisis. As USAID Administrator Samantha Power emphasizes time and again, we are a climate agency now, because we have to be. Our climate strategy will guide our efforts through 2030 and will ramp up climate mitigation and adaptation efforts and further integrate climate change considerations into international development and humanitarian assistance programs across all sectors. USAID will support and facilitate targeted action to confront the most urgent demands of the climate crisis, focusing on climate mitigation and adaptation efforts in priority geographies for maximum impact. And we will push for the systems-changing interventions we need to create an enabling environment for the renewable energy revolution. In the most recent President's budget request, USAID requested approximately $1.6 billion for climate mitigation and adaptation, including $650 million for programming across sectors that provide significant climate co-benefits. This more than doubles USAID's current programming and expands our reach to support climate action and investments in renewable energy. By 2030, USAID aims to mobilize $150 billion in new public and private finance and partner with indigenous and local communities, women, and youth in locally led efforts. These actions will directly support prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. As President Biden said in the recent virtual leaders meeting on climate, the countries that take decisive action now to create the industries of the future will be the ones that reap the economic benefits of the clean energy boom that's coming. USAID seeks to help countries drive this sort of clean energy security and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific. We know that the prosperity of the Indo-Pacific means a more secure society for all. This requires investments to encourage innovation, strengthen economic competitiveness, produce good-paying jobs, rebuild supply chains, and expand economic opportunities for middle-class families. 1.5 billion people in the Indo-Pacific will join the middle class over the next 10 years. Demands for resources will only increase given this growth. This year, Asia's Clean Energy Forum will focus on the innovative and integrative solutions needed to achieve a low-carbon future. USAID already works with our Asian counterparts through a strong network of government and private sector partnerships that make shared investments in decarbonization and clean energy. The United States supports ASEAN's centrality in Southeast Asia. That's why we're working with countries throughout the region to build resilience to the climate crisis and accelerate the region's transition to clean energy. The United States intends to support the new U.S.-ASEAN Climate Futures Initiative dedicated to tackling the climate crisis and keeping the goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach. The hundreds of millions of dollars already invested in clean energy and climate resilience projects across the region contributes to green jobs throughout the Indo-Pacific. For example, our recently launched USAID Southeast Asia's Smart Power program will support decarbonization of the region's power systems, increase regional energy trade, and accelerate the deployment of clean energy technologies. All of this equates to new employment opportunities for people in the Indo-Pacific. The United States reiterated its commitment at the ASEAN-US Special Summit in Washington, D.C. in May and announced plans for several initiatives to help meet the region's enormous infrastructure needs in a sustainable manner that accelerates the clean energy transition. For example, USAID will partner with the U.S. State Department and U.S. International Development Finance Corporation to convene an ASEAN Nature Finance Innovation Roundtable under the new U.S.-ASEAN Forest Future Initiative. This will catalyze the use of innovative financial mechanisms and mobilize additional finance to support the long-term conservation, restoration, and sustainable management of critical ecosystems in Southeast Asia. These efforts, along with the goal of providing technical and financial support alongside others to ensure that each ASEAN country can achieve their nationally determined targets, will also help lift economies, reduce emissions, and strengthen energy security. Getting it right enables countries across the region to deliver clean, affordable, and reliable electricity to homes and businesses. Our continued cooperation is crucial to meet the challenges that are going to shape the 21st century. I'm looking forward to working with you all to advance our shared vision for the region, to accelerate an equitable, sustainable, and inclusive transition to net zero emissions by 2030. By coming together this week at ACEF, each of you has expressed your commitment to meeting and overcoming these challenges. The days ahead will be full of thoughtful discussions and engagement. I wish you all success as we work together to drive the clean energy transition and move towards a low-carbon and resilient future. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Assistant Administrator Caldwell. Our first keynote speaker is Dr. Ho-Sung Lee, Chair, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Dr. Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be at the opening of the ACEF 2022 to share my views about the net zero transition based on the IPCC's latest findings. The IPCC has released a trilogy of reports from August of last year to April 2022 on the changes in the climate system, their impact on nature and people, and mitigation of impacts and climate change. These three reports are a dire warning about the consequences of inaction. Climate change is a grave and mounting threat to our well-being and a healthy planet. The reports inform that to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, global GHG emissions must peak before 2025 and decline by 43% by 2030. This largely confirms what our special report on 1.5 degrees Celsius warming said 4 years ago. Limiting warming requires limiting emissions of greenhouse gases, and limiting it to 1.5 degrees Celsius requires global CO2 emissions to drop to net zero in the next 3 decades, which implies an annual decline of 7% throughout this period. This compares with the trend of last 10 years when the greenhouse gas emissions increased at an annual rate of 1.3%. We must decrease emissions. We must realize that there is a limit on how much we can emit CO2 globally and cumulatively over the next 30 years to stay within the 1.5 degrees Celsius. The IPCC assessed that the limit on global cumulative emissions is 500 gigaton of CO2, and it is also known as the carbon budget for 1.5 degrees warming. The CO2 emissions currently are around 44 gigaton, the highest level in human history. And if we continue the current trend of emissions, the carbon budget will be exhausted in about 10 years. And we are not on track to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And further, the fossil fuel infrastructure we have today is likely to continue to emit CO2 over its remaining operational life, and the resulting cumulative CO2 emissions are estimated at 660 gigaton of CO2. This alone exceeds the carbon budget of 500 gigaton of CO2. Therefore, unless there are immediate and deep emissions reductions across all sectors, 1.5 degrees Celsius is beyond reach. But let me highlight the IPCC findings that we have the tools and know-how to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. The first, energy demand can be lowered by 40 to 70% in the next 3 decades through efficiency improvement and lifestyle changes. Second, fuel substitution toward carbon-free energy sources and carbon capture, storage, and use will define energy transformation. Third, widespread zero-carbon electrification for transport has the greatest potential. Aviation and shipping will need alternative fuels such as low-emission hydrogen and biofuels. Fourth, improving materials efficiency and enhancing the potential for a circular economy will help the industry reduce the carbon footprint of its supply chains. Fifth, development of carbon dioxide removal methods is required to counterbalance hard to limit emissions in some sectors. They are essential to achieving net zero, and there will be a need for agreed methods for measuring, reporting, and verification of carbon dioxide removal. And lastly, land. Land can provide large-scale emissions reductions and remove and store CO2 at scale, but it cannot compensate for delayed emissions reductions in other sectors. But it is essential to protect and restore natural ecosystems to absorb CO2 as much as possible. As a result, the competition for land will intensify and comprehensive policy will be needed to address the competing demand for land. All these boil down to a question of investment. Climate action calls for investment gaps to be closed. Our report indicates that financial flows are 3 to 6 times lower than levels required to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. However, there is sufficient global capital to close investment gaps, and we recognize that the challenge of closing gaps is the widest for developing countries. And all these further condense into a bottom line of cost-benefit of action. IPCC assesses that the increase in cost for limiting warming to 1.5 degrees instead of 2 degrees is estimated at 1.3 to 1.5% of GDP in 2015. The question would be then whether climate damage to be avoided due to less warming of half a degree is greater than the cost of reducing warming by 0.5 degrees. The Paris Agreement signals that the answer would be yes. What's lacking now is a link connecting the global net benefit of action to an individual local net benefit of action. This link would ensure that a decentralized decision of climate actions will autonomously and independently aggregate into global actions sufficient for achieving net zero. This link is yet to exist. I believe the task ahead is to find and activate this link. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Our next keynote speech is recorded from Dr. Martin Keller, Laboratory Director, NREL, and President of the Alliance for Sustainable Energy, and his colleague, Andrea Watson, Laboratory Program Manager, II Lab Strategy.
The climate crisis is no longer a projection, but an increasingly current reality for communities around the world. Throughout April, parts of India and Pakistan experienced unseasonable, record-breaking heat, with temperatures exceeding 40 degrees Celsius and approaching 50 degrees on some days. This has impacted millions of people and will result in heat-related sickness and death. The heat is also impacting harvests in one of the world's largest wheat-producing regions, compounding the potential wheat shortages resulting from the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. The science is clear on climate change. To avoid the worst impacts to people, biodiversity, infrastructure, and the economy, It is imperative to keep global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. To curb temperature growth, all nations need to set a path to decarbonize at incredible speed and scale. Countries will need to be on a net zero path by the middle of the century to ensure a livable future, particularly for the world's most vulnerable populations. A fundamental shift away from fossil fuels to power our homes, move about in our cities, and generate prosperity is possible with an open imagination, boldness in action, and a commitment to ambition. Society will not only need to fully leverage the technologies and solutions that are available to us today, such as solar and wind systems, but also continue to invest in rapidly researching, developing, and deploying innovative and emerging technologies that we can scale. Here at NREL, we envision a clean energy future for the world. NREL has decades of focused leadership in clean energy research, development, and deployment. From our work in basic science to systems engineering, analysis, and deployment, all our researchers are focused on solving market-relevant problems that result in deployable solutions. To respond with the urgency demanded by climate change, we must do as much in the next 10 years as we have during the past 40. In the coming decade, NREL will lead research, innovation, and strategic partnerships to deliver solutions for a clean energy economy. NREL executes this mission through a portfolio of research in renewable power technologies, energy efficiency, sustainable transportation, and integrating and optimizing energy systems. Looking forward, we must build off this foundation to scale our impact, accelerate our progress, and expand our capabilities to achieve our vision within a meaningful timeline. NREL has undertaken strategic planning to identify critical research areas that we need to address to meet the challenges that the world faces. NREL is expanding and developing capabilities and research to address 3 megatrends. NREL is focusing on modernization of the grid to support a high level of renewable energy integration, using storage, advanced technologies and controls, and expanding transportation, electrification while maintaining grid reliability and security. NREL's work focuses on modernizing grids that are resilient to the changing climate, as well as the evolving cyber threats that face utilities. Research, development, and analysis and deployment in this critical objective will enable and accelerate progress toward a carbon emission-free power sector. To achieve our vision, we must also contribute to deep decarbonization across multiple sectors, including hard to decarbonize areas such as fuels and manufacturing. Central to this critical objective is the use of affordable, renewable electricity as the driving force for the conversion of low-energy molecules such as water and carbon dioxide to generate cleaner, high-value, and high-energy chemicals, fuels, and materials. Our researchers are focused on green hydrogen generation, carbon dioxide capture and use, low-carbon and energy-dense fuels, and novel industrial processes that use renewable electricity for creating the products we need for our economy to prosper. The acceleration and scaling of innovations toward commercially viable solutions is crucial to achieve economy-wide net zero greenhouse gas emissions. The third critical objective NREL is addressing is circularity. As we move toward a clean energy economy, the sustainability of energy materials from source to end of life must be addressed. This supports not only sustainability, but energy security and resilience. Our research strives to reduce waste and preserve resources by designing materials and products with reuse, recycling, and upcycling in mind from the start. In addition, our work in this critical objective will contribute to upcycling plastics, helping address the enormous challenge posed by waste plastics in our oceans and landfills. NREL continues to focus on using science and innovation to lead the way to a clean energy future in the US, Asia, across the world. Our researchers work hard not only on developing the next technological solutions, but also on supporting countries through partnerships with industry, academia, nonprofits, and governments in evaluating and developing resilient carbon-free energy systems to meet the needs for their communities.
Hi, my name is Andrea Watson, and I am the Laboratory Program Manager for Strategy at NREL. Over my entire career at NREL, I have worked closely with USAID, ensuring that NREL and USAID are jointly delivering a clean energy future for the world. NREL, in partnership with USAID, has been working with partner countries in Asia for over a decade to bring tools, resources, and technical assistance to support partners as they power their growth in a sustainable manner. Countries are balancing the immediate needs of reducing poverty and supporting development while minimizing the long-term impacts on the environment. Under the Advanced Energy Partnership for Asia, NREL and USAID are training policymakers on models that provide insight into economic and human health impacts of renewable energy transitions. This information helps decision makers take into account and mitigate the employment and air quality impacts of different policy pathways. USAID and NREL have developed and made publicly available models and knowledge products that inform policy decisions, support renewable energy project development, and enable regional innovation and entrepreneurship in ways that we could not have imagined. There are two flagship toolkits I would like to highlight for you. First, Greening the Grid addresses the technical challenges to grid modernization and presents state-of-the-art practices in bringing advanced energy technologies into the power sector. Secondly, the Renewable Energy Data Explorer lowers the information barrier to help get projects on the ground and support innovation. For example, technology startup Okra Solar uses solar irradiance data provided by RE Data Explorer in conjunction with NREL's system advisory model. They perform preliminary techno-economic analysis and optimize standalone solar home system design and integrated microgrid configuration. Science, engineering, and technology are fundamental to transforming the energy sector, but these tools cannot be deployed without accounting for society as a whole. Well-paying jobs in the energy sector are expected to nearly triple, with a projected 29 million clean energy jobs expected by 2050 worldwide. According to the International Renewable Energy Agency, only about 30% of jobs in renewable energy and only 14% of senior management positions in the energy sector overall are held by women. As clean energy jobs come online, there is an opportunity to address social inequities as part of the transformation. Increasing women's participation in these well-paying industries can buoy multiple sustainable development goals. Through the Global Power System Transformation Consortium, we are making many resources such as course packages and trainings that are specifically addressing gender inequality in our industries available at no cost. We invite women in this sector to join our leadership group to help level the gender playing field in the power sector. The Resilient Energy Platform provides guidance, resources, and access to experts to help countries plan for resilient and secure power systems. Greater resiliency of power systems to climate impacts reduces the frequency of outages, which disproportionately impact rural and low-income communities and can have a devastating economic impact on small enterprises, particularly those in the agriculture sector. Looking forward, USAID and NREL will continue to provide support to Asian nations as they take bold, ambitious leaps forward into a sustainable and equitable future. This includes expanding deployment of floating solar PV panels, which can offer the multiple benefits of increasing renewable energy generation, mitigating land competition for solar expansion, and increasing the adaptive capacity of existing hydropower systems in the face of increasing temperatures. We will support countries in reducing their reliance on imported fuels by planning for electric vehicle expansion and the potential impacts on the power grid. We will work with partners to understand the need for battery energy storage systems to support a renewable energy future and the need to plan for circularity for energy security. We will support microgrid expansion to increase electrification and resilience of remote communities. And we will continue our collaboration with universities, businesses, and decision makers to increase the local capacity to implement, scale, and drive transformation. Thank you for inviting NREL to participate in ACEF, and we look forward to working with you all for years to come.
Thank you, Mr. Keller and Ms. Watson. We now move to a panel discussion on catalyzing the energy transition. The panel will be moderated by Dr. Priyantha Wijayatunga, Chief of the Energy Sector Group at ADB. Joining Priyantha on the panel will be Dr. Hongping Lui, Director Energy Division, United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, General Secretary Sharon Burrow, International Trade Union Confederation, Dr. Arunabar Ghosh, Chief Executive Officer, Council on Energy, Environment and Water from India, and Mrs. Wasantha Pereira, Secretary to the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Reform and former Secretary of Power, the Government of Sri Lanka. Priyantha, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Steve. Let me first of all say, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. Welcome to this opening plenary panel discussion on accelerating actions towards energy transition. Also, let me extend a special welcome to the eminent panelists in this session. Dr. Hongpeng Liu, Ms. Sharon Burrow, Dr. Arunabha Ghosh, and Ms. Wasantha Pereira to this important panel discussion. Considering that climate change is one of the greatest threats, of course, it is not, if not the greatest, that the human race is facing, it is paramount that we accelerate our efforts to bring the equilibrium point at the earliest possible time so that the increase in temperature will not go beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius when it comes to global temperature by the end of the century. In this process, obviously, we need to recognize that different countries are at different stages of development. Therefore, we need to have a differentiated approach because they have different capacities to contribute and obviously different capacity to accelerate actions. These differentiated approaches are obviously well reflected in respective countries' commitments and their nationally determined contributions. However, it is important to see whether these commitments are being implemented on the ground. Do these countries have the capacity to honor these commitments? During this discussion, these eminent panelists will provide expert views on whether we are on course to achieving the climate targets we all are already set. What are the key challenges and barriers we need to overcome? What are the integrated solutions we need to think of with energy transition, where adaptation measures can be also embedded in part of those measures? Cross-sectoral approaches and just transition aspects mainstreamed. So what is the role of multilateral institutions like Asian Development Bank? And how can we support to close the financing gap? These are the areas where I would like to touch on during the panel discussion. So with these few remarks, let me now turn to our panel. Let me start off with Dr. Hongpeng Liu with my question on what are the key challenges that the countries in Asia and the Pacific need to overcome to accelerate their energy transition. Over to you, Dr. Liu.
Thank you very much, Priyantha, for this opportunity to share some views about energy transition in this region, in the Asia-Pacific region. As you mentioned, this is a very critical junction for energy transition. If we look at Asia-Pacific as a whole, this is the region with 6% of global population and 1/3 of the world GDP. And at the same time, it's still a lot of citizens in developing countries has been left out in the forward march to modern energy. As the president of ADB at the opening mentioned, some 157 million people are still without electricity, and 1.6 billion are without access to clean cooking. So that's exactly the situation we have to address, and also the challenges, especially talking about the energy transition. And I think the previous distinguished speaker also mentioned more than 50% of emissions come from the energy sector in this region and now country. So in this region, it's on track to achieve the greenhouse gas reductions needed for achieving the Paris Agreement, and also to achieving SDG 7 even by 2030. So that's a lot of challenges. So I think the challenge, if we look at the current energy system, it's been expanding in the second half of the 20th century, utilizing fuels such as coal, oil, and gas to meet the rising demand. So the recently released, I think the chair of IPCC just mentioned clearly that we're close to the point of irreversibly damaging our climate. So the current energy system has to be changed to achieve sustainable development goals and the net zero ambitions. So energy transition is the only way to realize such long-term goals. And however, energy transition is a revolution change and cannot be achieved overnight. So I think there are a number of the challenges we have to think about along this process. And first, we have to look at the policy side. So in the Asia Pacific region, we are not on track to meet the Sustainable Development Goal target, including SDG 7. So to energy access to reliable, sustainable, and modern energy to all. So the transition to clean energy economies must accelerate. Now, policy change towards should be more responsive and inclusive. So let's take an example for energy access. I think the policy attention should focus on energy, ensuring equitable, high-quality energy services. And also at the same time, electrification plans need to target achieving upper tiers of energy access, especially attention should be paid to these off-grid communities where standardization of technology and business models could support more sustainable and affordable operations. And secondly, we also look at the challenges for technology. The clean energy technology development, the deployment, underpin renewable energy and energy efficiency goals. So greater efforts are needed to drive technology costs down, and while raising the performance levels and introducing increasingly effective services to deliver modern renewables and modern energy services. And both supply and the demand side should be also addressed in parallel for this kind of technology improvement. And also, lastly, I want to mention the investment finance. According to IEA, so keeping the global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees will require 4 trillion in annual investment in clean energy projects by 2030. So it's really a huge amount of investment needs. But if you look at the recent years, actually this is a decline. To achieve SDG 7, we need, and also the zero pledges, we really need a tremendous investment. So although the pandemic and the high energy prices have reduced the physical spaces and shifted the policy priorities to economic recovery, but the region is in the critical point where energy pathways chosen will determine how close this regional comes to achieve this SDG 7 and the net zero. So I really think the smart investment are needed. And also private sector's investment are very important. So that we can also discuss later, and when you have this kind of questions on the financing part. But last challenge, I think the ongoing Ukraine crisis has a greater impact on energy transition. This is really the challenge for this region, because the government have experienced a sharp rise in fossil fuel subsidies spending, contracting their physical space. At the same time, rising these fossil fuel subsidies could also potentially adversely impact the physical spending on renewable energy and the energy efficiency. But although, the situation probably that's also positively, we can see high energy costs for fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are also good, for the government to look at the renewable energy as an option, to replace the current existing fossil fuels. So that's benefit for the, the region, and also look at the role of regional cooperation to address these challenges. So that must not be forgotten. The regional cooperation through this kind of common energy challenges to be addressed by the regional collaboration in this region, and also can be better solved through this continuation of open dialogue and international exchanges like ACEF. We have a very good platform to address these challenges. Thank you very much, Priyanka. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Liu, for that extensive coverage of the breadth of challenges we come across in accelerating our actions. Let me now turn on the same question. Let me now turn to Dr. Ghosh, particularly, he is from a think tank which deals with cross-sectoral issues, not just the energy, but environment and also water, and which comes very much, cross-sectoral, energy-related interventions where we need to very carefully look at. Let me ask Dr. Ghosh, what are your thoughts on the challenges what we face in the Asia-Pacific region? Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Ghosh.
Thank you, Priyanka, and good morning to everyone. Apologies for joining a few minutes into the panel. Straight towards the question, the most important thing that I think is a challenge, especially for the region, is that there is no linearity in the energy transitions. This is the region where you have to do energy access, the transition from the lack of access to modern energy to modern energy in the first place. You have to do the transition from a massive shift of energy, the pattern of energy demand changing from large numbers of people moving from rural to urban areas. And you have to do a third transition, which is about a deeper and deeper integration of these countries into global energy markets, which was not the case in the past. And you have to do the transition towards growing your energy system while making sure that every new molecule or electron of energy that's produced is cleaner than the one before. And normally, one would have thought that these are transitions that can happen one after the other. And that's the kind of linearity that the patterns of development in the past have afforded countries to go through. The challenge for the Asia-Pacific region is that these simultaneous energy transitions then not just test the energy system, they test the economic system, they test the social cohesion, they test political resilience against all sorts of shocks. The second big challenge, I believe, is actually in dealing with the issue of risk. Because there are two types of risk that are fundamental, or I would say three. The first, of course, is the risk of reimagining energy systems altogether, where you're on one hand you've inherited an energy system that is large, centralized, and not adequate, towards moving towards energy systems that are going to be increasingly decentralized. And yet adequate to meet the needs for communities, not just those who have the resources, but including serving those that don't. Now that requires technological changes. That's the second type of risk, right? That you're dealing with a way of approaching technology and business models that the energy utilities are not really familiar with and not really comfortable with. And that then leads us to the broader macroeconomic risk. These are fast-growing economies, but also these are economies that are buffeted constantly by all sorts of shocks. So how do you then ring-fence these investments in sustainable energy infrastructure in a manner that regardless of the shocks, whether it is a natural extreme climate event, or whether it is a financial crisis, or whether it is a global energy crisis. Not every crisis that's buffeting these economies are of their own making. And yet, as soon as a crisis hits, the investments into these economies starts pulling out. So you're left with this kind of conundrum that you need more and more international investment coming into your economies, which then has its own set of consequences of putting pressure on your currency and so forth. But at the same time, having to attract that investment while acknowledging that you don't have control over all the risks. And the third big challenge, I would argue, is associated with the changing patterns of employment and skills that will be needed to build this kind of infrastructure. Now, we always focus on the materials and the money side, but there is a manpower part of this equation. If a country like India, for instance, has to deploy 10.5 megawatts of renewables every hour for the next 9 years to meet the goals that Prime Minister has set for the country in Glasgow, 10.5 megawatts of renewables every working hour for the next 9 years. So you need, of course, a lot of material. You need a lot of money, but you also need a lot of skilled and semi-skilled manpower that is available, at the right places at the right time. So I think when we dive into the details of this, these different sorts of risks of just having to chart a pathway that developed countries of the past have never actually charted before, of having to become more resilient against risks over which you don't have complete control, and being able to think through the money, materials, and manpower parts of the equation are these kind of granular things that economies in this region have to go through before we can say with confidence that we know what we're talking about.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ghosh, for those very important thoughts, particularly on the risks, coming as a major challenge for us to move forward in this area. And particularly your last point on manpower, the human resources, that's pretty important and critical. And I think that's a good start to pass the baton to Ms. Barrow, who is from the International Trade Union Confederation, to look at this question from the viewpoint of people involved, the affected people, and we would love to have your thoughts. Thank you. Over to you, Ms. Barrow.
Thank you. Well, let me agree with the other panelists that we are simply not on track. We are almost out of time, and the current commitments through NDCs would see us way above the 2 degrees, let alone 1.5, that we need to give a fighting chance to both island states and the low-lying areas of countries in our region. There's no doubt that people are impacted dramatically by the rising temperatures. We've now got excessive heat stress in many parts of the world, and we're not geared up for that in terms of our working lives. But we've also got the displacement of people, and we all know the risks of not being able to manage displaced people when we can't manage 25 million refugees in the world. The thought of managing tens of millions of climate refugees is indeed pretty daunting. So we need to actually go back and say, well, what do we need to do to try and avoid the worst of these impacts? And we simply need to speed up. We need to get to a scale of energy transition, but also other areas of technological transition, the circular economy, the changing of the design and the operations of major cities, all of it dependent on energy, but not only energy. So we need to face the reality that my fellow panelist, I think it was Dr. Lam, was right, that the war, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, has certainly made the dependence on fossil fuels heavily exposed in many parts of the world. But if we had had a plan that saw gas truly in terms of its current stocks as a transition and diminishing rather than the demand for expansion of gas as coal and other areas of fossil fuels are closed down, then we would be in a better position. We've almost got no plans for energy efficiency, and we are at risk of seeing people without hope that the energy shift will in fact see them protected. So we, of course, focus very much on both climate action but just transition in the midst. And we are not seeing the dialogue with workers to look for solutions in the current environment that is so vital. We're not seeing the transparency of plans for renewal in communities, so that communities where there are jobs lost, there is a lack of economy and therefore sustainability, that those communities can see what the plan is, as they say. What is the plan? What's the alternate industry? What's the capacity for investment? I know we're going to talk about investment in the next round, so I won't labour the point, but just to say that global solidarity is vital in three areas. One is in investment. We'll come back to that. The other is in a regulated framework. Right now, we're looking at companies making windfall profits from the environment where you can exploit the fossil fuels that are available in terms of supply and demand. We used to regulate utilities companies, even the distribution, and yet we've let it float with the market to the point where this is now really dangerous. Because if working people can't afford energy, if businesses can't afford energy, then of course it has broader impact on the economy and jobs. So looking at energy efficiency, looking at a regulated environment around a climate legislation generally, and this will become more and more essential to avoid litigation, but equally looking at what are the preventative measures. But at the end of it, we know there are jobs in the transition, but you have to have first the investment. We'll come back to that. Secondly, you need to have workers and their unions at the table so that they can both be part of the design, but also part of the confidence that will drive the security of support that we need to move much more quickly. So the ADB and other investors have a huge role to play, but it isn't just in investment. It is also in terms of looking at how they share the technology that is in fact being invested. How do we actually look for creative solutions where you might buy out technological patents, but then open source them to move the technology? And the other thing that is quite distressing really is to see that people are still thinking about only one solution or one linear track. And for example, smart grids, absolutely vital in major population areas and areas of industry, but not at all necessary if you are putting much more individualized units or community units of solar to drive clean cooking or to provide small amounts of lighting, electricity, etc. So community solutions can only be delivered if the community is at the table. The workplace with workers and their unions, the communities with community voices. We have enormous amount of work to do, and we can only do it if we're actually working together. We have the technology. I will argue that we have the money for investment. We simply need the political will to shift away from fossil fuels.
Thank you very much, Ms. Barrow. Again, the breadth of the discussion, the points you presented, it's very, very important from the viewpoint of the society, how the society should move on and take this task seriously, and also how the different players can come together to address the challenges. Thank you very much. Let me now turn on the same question to Mrs. Pereira, who is, of course, from the government, and I'm sure we can listen to her from the viewpoint of the challenges and the difficulties as government face across the globe, particularly in developing countries. Over to you, Mrs. Pereira.
Good morning and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you, Priyantha. Thank you for inviting me to speak. And to begin with, as Mr. Liu mentioned, energy transition is the only way. So energy is the lifeblood of civilization. In the history, civilizations were built around waterways, but today it's concentrated around energy sources. Energy transition is not just adaptation from one resource in place of another. It's a complete transformation of the society and the civilization. Therefore, it's a new social order, new politics, new jurisprudence, and a new reality. We carry the genes of circular economy and sustainability within us. I guess we are a very strong people in apprehending circular economy, like again, and environmental jurisprudence, as it was our forgotten history. In that way, the envisaged social order is nothing totally new to us. It should be in our genes. Therefore, I believe that Asia and Pacific is going to sustain this new social order if established fully. What is needed here is to arrange this new social order through our legal and social frameworks. This just transition should focus on how the cost and benefits of climate action is distributing equally among us. I would say the biggest challenge faced by many countries in the transition are technological and financial limitations and geopolitical concerns to some extent. I see no one-size-fits-for-all strategy here. All countries should be working together to find what is best for their regions and their communities. This needs governments with surgically precise decision-making. This needs innovative minds equivalent to all innovators of the history put together. This needs investors supporting just transition as part of their commitment to incorporate environmental, social, and governance factors across their operations. And this needs the development partners to be the best facilitator one could ever imagine. I believe we are a group of nestlings with well-grown feathers, afraid of leaving the nest. A strong wind to break the nest will put us on flight.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pereira, for this very thoughtful and very philosophical view of what we need to do, and that the fact that we are quite resilient and we can take up the challenge, and eventually we will take it through this transition. And let me now get back to Dr. Liu. At the end of the day, as you quite rightly indicated in your opening remarks, that the financing is a critical part of it, of this whole transition, and it's not easy, and to bring these financial resources. From your viewpoint, we have the institutions like Asian Development Bank, which can come in, but how can this financing gap to support energy transition can be facilitated to meet this process from your thinking? And do we have enough money? And if we do, if we don't, how can we make it available? Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Priyantha, for this question. This is quite a challenge, the question. As I mentioned earlier, based on IEA's analysis, keeping the global temperature increases to 1.5 degrees will require $4 trillion in annual investment in clean energy by 2030. And also last year, there was a study about the project financing from 9 major multilateral development banks, MDBs, which also include ADB. The banks provide about 12 billion annually to clean energy, and also 3 billion for fossil fuels. We know some of these MDBs still support fossil fuel project. Mostly it's natural gas. Of course, coal has been limited for most of MDBs for financing. And as Managing Director General Woon also mentioned, ADB aiming from 2019 to 2030. This is 11 years, about 100 billion, financing. So that if you look at this, it's far from this requirement for energy transition. So from this MDB's commitment and also the potential. So the suggest the incremental investment to achieve SDG 7. We also have the annual kind of review about the progress for SDG 7 on energy. So more than 500 billion annually through 2030 for the Asia Pacific region alone. So that means we need annually, so like 500 billion to support the Asia Pacific region to achieve SDG 7 by 2030. That include this energy access and also renewable energy and energy efficiency. So it means most of the investment will come from outside of MDBs, like mainly the private sector, to play a critical role for the investment. But it doesn't mean the MDBs cannot play a good role. So I think MDBs will play an active role in closing the financing gaps through the technical and the financial support to member states, especially with these innovative tools. So most of the MDBs support the government, support projects through government. So that will have an impact if the innovative tools and the instrument will be introduced through the government. So first we can think about, to support the government to create an enabling environment. I think MDB can play a very important role. ADB, the World Bank, and the other MDBs, and to work together with the government to use a public finance in the form of instrument that reduce transfer or compensate for risks of generating investors' demand. So that also gives a clear signal for the private sector to reduce their risks for investment for energy transition. And secondly, to support the financial systems reform. For the support, this mainly to focus on the low carbon energy and the technologies. So there are a lot of countries already use MDB's investment and the support to do this kind of risk management, like guidelines, and also support the develop the financing roadmaps, and also to support the guidelines for banking sector to even issue this green bond, to reach the value, maximum the investment from MDBs and to reach out to private sector's financing. And the third one, to support the reform of subsidies on fossil fuels. That I think it's mainly to use this MDB's support from the policy study side, from the policy guidance, and to optimize this kind of subsidies, and also to focus more on the incentives in the favor of fossil fuels to expand this to the clean source of energy. So I really think MDB can play a very important role for this. And from ACEF study, we estimate the physical gain from the removing energy subsidies amount to be 10% of the region's GDP, and also more than 30% of government revenue, which could be used to boost the investment across the SDGs, not only for energy, even to support other SDGs. And finally, the key instrument is also for this energy transition is about the carbon financing. I think the MDBs can play a role to support this kind of carbon financing and also including carbon taxes and the emission trading schemes. So that MDBs already done a lot of good work. I think this should continue and really to provide this support for this carbon finance at the regional level.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. We have almost very little time. Dr. Ghosh, any additional thought, quick ones, a minute each?
I know we're out of time. So, of course, we keep talking about de-risking, but one of the things that MDBs really have to get into is different types of de-risking that is needed for these emerging economies. There is, of course, de-risking of the technologies that are already known but are not getting deployed at scale. And that's happening for the reasons I was saying earlier. The kinds of risks over which these economies might not always have control, the currency fluctuation, the changing macroeconomic conditions overall. That's one thing. But there's also de-risking that the MDBs need to do of technologies that have not yet kind of come to a commercial stage. And that de-risking of early stage R&D is an effective deployment of public capital, which will then trigger innovation. And then there's a third type of de-risking, the de-risking of the existing fossil energy infrastructure that has to be transitioned off and in an accelerated way. But how do you do that? Now, these are three very different de-risking strategies. That's not going to happen all on its own. But just one more point. The advantage that MDBs have is that they're operating across multiple countries. The disadvantage the MDBs have is that they operate across multiple countries. What do I mean? I mean that if you have country by country program, then you're actually not going to be able to de-risk. You need to be able to create portfolios that cut across country program boundaries. Because otherwise, a solar project in one country has the same kind of risk profile as a coal project in the same country because the macroeconomic conditions haven't changed. It is when you're able to do cross-country portfolios and then create de-risking strategies, that's when you truly leverage the power of a multilateral development bank to be a catalyst for finance and not just be a vanilla investor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ghosh. Quickly, Ms. Barrow, any additional thoughts? I think you are muted.
Three very quick points. One is that we haven't talked about the distortionary impact of fossil fuel subsidies. Our view about this is that you don't withdraw the subsidies, you actually repurpose them. You put the conditions on them that mean they're invested in indeed the transition. There's a lot of money in harmful environmental subsidies. The second is that we need to actually pool resources. It isn't just about de-risking. If we pool resources to share technology, then that in itself makes access much easier and therefore cheaper. And the third thing is that if we look at the multiple layers of debt reduction, if it's directed towards sustainable infrastructure. If we look again at the questions that was raised about what is the investment that's generating indeed gains in the broader community. And we know that renewable energy is so much cheaper, but it actually grows jobs. For every 10 jobs in renewable energy, there's 5 to 10 in manufacturing, and there's 30 to 35 if they're good jobs in the broader economy. We can actually finance the transition, but we have to be serious about it. My final point is that every unit of currency, it isn't about separate buckets of money. Every unit of currency must in fact be through a climate friendly and indeed a rights-based lens.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Barrow. Finally, but Ms. Ferreira, any thoughts from your side?
Yeah, Dr. Priyantha, I know you're running out of time. We are running out of time in meeting the climate targets as well. Therefore, I wish to say that we have to, if we want to achieve these 2030 targets, and if we want to be net zero one day, the NDCs have to be reassessed and readjusted without further delay, and implement them collectively and bring in legislations. Otherwise, we are going to fail in this mission. I hope we can do it with these necessary adjustments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In closing, I must say we have, we can do it, and we are not on course. It's important that we have the commitments from all the stakeholders if you want to get there. And the MDBs have a great role to play, particularly in leveraging financing from other sources, so that we can meet the requirements of financing in this particular sector. So with that, just a quick summary. Let me pass it back to Steve. Thank you very much, all the panelists, for the excellent discussion. I think it has been really, really valuable and contributory. Thank you. Thank you very much. Back to you, Steve. I think you are on mute, Steve.
My sincere apologies. Thanks, Priyantha. Just by way of summary, we had President Massa talk to us about ambition. MDG Wu Chong talked about urgency, which is underscored by a fire alarm, but also spoken very thoroughly by all of our panelists and keynote speakers. Dr. Lee, the chairperson of the IPCC, was very, very interesting, talking about the link between ambition and delivery, which I think was a great keynote. And the use, talking about just transition by Secretary General Burrow and Secretary Pereira, was a very, very important point. And then Dr. Lee talking about private sector investment and engaging private sector investment. I think we have a lot of work to go, and I think this week sets the tone. This sets the tone for this week very, very well. So I wish you a very fruitful ACEF 2022 with engaging sessions, opportunities for networking in our new networking facility, which is on the platform, and a renewed focus to catalyze the energy transition. Thank you.